Explore how you can be fully alive, becoming the man God intended. This is On Target with Vince Dacchioli.
Men, how you doing? And welcome to our Men on Target curriculum. It's such a joy to be able to be with you. Our session 1 is what we're going to enter right now. And the title is Character Defined. Are you aligned? Where are men today? I want to start with that. I believe men today are suffering from what I call moral schizophrenia. Moral schizophrenia is truth learned on Sunday that cannot be applied on Monday. Here's what I mean by that. We go to church and our pastors are so great at bringing us great truth every week. We have our Bible, we learn, and hopefully we're growing. But then what happens is when we go to work on Monday and get into the real world, all of a sudden we're being compromised in that we can't really live that out, because if I really live that out, I might not get that promotion. In fact, I might lose my job, and I might not be looked at as being cool in the workplace. So there's a tendency, if we're not deeply grounded, to compromise, and that's what I mean by moral schizophrenia. The result of that is that I believe in our culture today there's a real lack or absence of godly character. And I don't know about you guys, but our world is so desperate for seeing the real deal today. My friend Ed Cole, before he passed away, had a great quote. He says, character is an internal quality that is fed by external sources. In other words, it's kind of like the old garbage in, garbage out. The stuff I put in ultimately determines what's going to come out of me. He goes on to say this. He says, the best character is in constant need, however, of checks and balances from without. It requires stimulus from without so it won't fail in development. Character deteriorates over time unless it is fed from external sources. It requires that stimulus. And he says the purity of the external source determines ultimately the strength of our character. I love 1 Corinthians 15:33. It says, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. In the early stages of my development, I did not live by that. I hung out with guys, and listen, I want to tell you, you become like the people you hang with, and sometimes that's not a healthy thing. Richard Foster has a great quote. He says, superficiality is the curse of our age. The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or even gifted people, he says, but for deep people. So what is the problem? How did we get here? I like to go back to something I discovered many years ago as I was sitting under the teaching of the brilliant Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey had an illustration he would use to define organizational behavior and organizational culture. He used an iceberg, and many of you have probably seen this illustration. He says the bulk of an iceberg is really unseen. It's underneath the surface of the water. It's only the tip that you really see. But the bulk is the substance of the culture or the organization. And at the base of that is its vision or mission, which ultimately informs its core values and operating principles, so that the things you see on top behaviorally, if you are lined up, then you're doing a good job. Let's use a retail organization as an example. Let's think about Nordstrom's, for instance. Nordstrom's is an incredible retail organization. They have a vision or a mission, which informs its core values and operating principles, so that when you and I walk into one of their stores, hopefully the behavior we see, the things we see as we're there, are consistent with their core values, operating principles, and their vision and mission. Now, if we overlay this and talk about it in the context of character, character can be assigned to an organization, as we've just seen, or to an institution like a church. But in our case, let's talk about a personal character, godly character, and let's take it personally. And let's look at that model again. Godly character is a one-to-one relationship between my Bible, my beliefs, or core values, and my behavior. So if I look at that model again with this as a kind of a backdrop now, the iceberg, the core of who I am, at the base of that is my Bible, the foundational truth that I ought to be living by in my life. It informs my belief system, the things I believe to be true, and my core values. And ultimately, as a man, I should be living that out with my behavior every day. The behavior is the things people around me see every day, or the things that my wife sees and experiences with me in our relationship, the things that people at work, your neighbors see of you. But here's what happens, guys. Again, we tend to chip off the top of the iceberg and float it off on the newest fad or technique or whatever it is I need to do to be cool and to be hip and to compromise oftentimes so that I can get that promotion or get the things that I need to get out of the world today. There's this disconnect. So what happens here is we struggle. It begs the question, why? Why does this happen with us? Why can't we just learn these principles and behave consistently? I believe it has to do with our inability to bring about effective changes in our life. Years ago, I came up with what I call the 6 principles for change. And let me kind of help you understand what these are. The first 3 are called event, awareness, and decision. I call this the cycle of hopelessness. Here's why. What's an event? Well, I do events all over North America. I do events for men. I do events for couples with my wife and leadership events for pastors. Promise Keeper rallies, they're events. Many of you men have been to a lot of different events. I like to say sometimes I think in our culture we have a tendency to event people to death because events by themselves don't transform. What they do is they bring about awareness. I go to an event and I am aware that something needs to change. My wedding was an event. It was not a marriage. We men wish it were that easy, but it doesn't work that way. It's a process. It takes time in order for that to work the right way. So an event brings about awareness, and then I make a decision. By golly, I'm going to do this. Well, if you look up the difference between decision and commitment, it is huge. A commitment with every fiber of your being committing to a new course of action. A commitment means that I am making a determined effort and I'm going to enter into the next stage we call process. But commitment, though, is the bridge you must cross to transform the old man into the new man. And if I can make that commitment and enter into process, now, and here's the part we don't like. Process is behavioral change over time. We don't like that. How many of you find yourself standing in front of your microwaves getting impatient? We just wish we could take a pill and the change would just happen. It's all about quick fixes. It's all about sound bites. We watch commercials on television that in 30 seconds or 60 seconds can tell a story sometimes. It's so compelling it can bring us to tears. Everything is so abbreviated. We don't like paying the price of going through the process for change. Do this with me for just a second. Let me illustrate. Fold your hands. And with your hands folded, how many of you, when you look at the way your hands are folded, you would say, you fold your hands the way I do? If you notice, I fold my hands with the right hand, first finger on top. Some of you fold your hands that way, and 50% of you, roughly, this works out in every large crowd, 50% of the time you're going to find people fold their hands the opposite way. Now, go ahead and reverse it. And I would just ask this question. How does that feel? Obviously, it's awkward. Why do you fold your hands that way? I want to tell you, nobody really knows why you fold your hands that way. It has nothing to do with being right brain, left brain, male, female, Italian, or just ordinary. I always like to slip that one in. It has to do with the fact that when you were little boys and you saw mom and dad fold their hands one day, your hands came together. And whatever way they came together that first time, over time you form what is commonly referred to as a habit. But scientists will tell you, you can't replace that habit. If I asked you to start folding your hands the other way, there'd be no reason for you to do that. But if you were to consciously practice folding your hands the other day for about 20 or 30 days, you will replace that habit with a new one. But it's the process that would have brought about the change. I remember when I was a young boy, my dad bought me my first set of weights. I was a skinny, scrawny 10-year-old boy. I ended up getting my weights from underneath the Christmas tree, and I pumped iron for about 10, 15 minutes, ripped off my shirt, ran to the mirror and looked, and I went, what is this? These weights don't work. I mean, I was frustrated. I expected that to happen right now. And of course, we know it doesn't happen that way. It's the process we need to enter into in order to ultimately bring about the desired result, which is the change. Okay? The other thing I've discovered is this. It's hard for me to change on my own. It takes a relational environment in order for truth that I'm learning to become transformational. And by saying that, let me take you to a quote by Gary Collins that I discovered a while back. He says it this way: leadership is less about setting vision, reaching goals, motivating and inspiring others. Important as these can be, he says leadership is more about helping people create environments where they can experience community with others and loving relationships that move everybody forward. Ephesians 2:10 is one of my favorite verses. It says this: "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God has prepared or beforehand ordained that we should walk in them." The word workmanship in the Greek is poema. It's where we get the word poem. It is saying literally we are God's poetry. The Bible says also, if we're in Christ, that we are a new creation. We are like a butterfly, and no one has ever referred to a butterfly as a converted worm, and neither will we do that with you and me. We are not converted worms. We are new when we are in Jesus. So, as we conclude these sessions every time, we're going to do two things. We're going to talk about life implication, and we're going to talk about life application. Let's talk about life implication first. What is the takeaway here? Well, if my life is not properly aligned, then two things are going to happen every time. One, my ability to reflect who Jesus is will be limited. And number two, I will have difficulty holding up under life's pressures. Okay? Now let's move to life application. And this is the important part for you now. We're getting into our discussion questions. Number one, how would I rate my current state of alignment? Number two, am I willing to make a commitment right now to stick to a process for change? And finally, number three, what are some practical things I can do to start this process? My prayer is that in your time together, in your discussion times with other men, that God will visit you powerfully and help you understand the things that you need to do. For now, don't forget about it.
Vince will be right back with another teaching from the Men on Target curriculum.
Men on Target Small Group Curriculum Volume 1 is now available on DVD. You can personally study or perhaps share with family and friends his life-changing study series. Vince D'Acchioli shares powerful and challenging 12-minute video sessions followed by insightful, thought-provoking discussion starters. This foundational module covers topics like, who is God? The God who is versus the God I want. What does God want from me? The three unalterable facts and how to really experience and know God. Volume 1 is the first 8-session module of the Men on Target video curriculum. This interactive DVD set is built for easy facilitation in a small group setting and is also ideal for personal study and reflection. Order your Men on Target Volume 1 DVD set for only $25 at www.otm.co. That's otm.co. Order your set today.
Now, another teaching from the Men on Target small group curriculum.
In our last session, we talked about godly character. In this session, the title is going to be, who is this God? I think that's a good question. A lot of people are confused about who this God really is. I like to use an illustration that I think most of you will resonate with. This, of course, is a cell phone. Almost everyone today has a cell phone. But I don't know that you really sat down and thought about all the different incredible things that this cell phone can do. It is amazing. I mean, with this phone, I have every appointment that I've ever had for the last probably 10 years. Every appointment I ever will have for the rest of my life are on here. I've got thousands of contacts. I can go to a contact. I can look up a person's phone number. It'll dial the phone for me, and I can talk to that person. I can FaceTime the person, which means they could be anywhere in the world, and we can have a conversation, eyeball to eyeball. It is amazing. If I'm hungry for a certain type of food, it's not a problem. All I've got to do, I can actually talk to it. I can say, hey, I'm interested in some Italian food. It'll find Italian restaurants It knows where I am on the planet. It'll tell me where the restaurants are. If I want to go to it, I can click on it and it'll give me directions. If I want to walk there, if I want to drive there, turn by turn, I don't have to think of very much. It is absolutely amazing what this thing will do. I'm attached to the internet, where of course we know any piece of information you could ever want about anything in the history of the world is available to me right here on this little tiny device. When I was in the business world, I had a computer that ran a 150 store retail chain back in the 70s. The computer that ran that organization would probably be twice as big as a cargo container on a ship. And yet this little device probably has more power than that entire computer had in the 70s. It is nothing short of amazing. Now, imagine for a moment you're walking down the street and it's 1984, 85, and you're walking down the street, and of course we didn't really have cell phones back in those days, and this little thing that I just described is laying in the gutter, and you pick it up and you look at it, and you think, what in the world is this? And you intuitively discover what this thing would do. What is your first thought? Whenever I share this with a live audience, someone usually says, what alien being left that behind? Well, I'll tell you, the alien being wasn't an alien being. The alien really was man. You and I. We produce this. Mankind produced this. Now, if I were to take a hair out of my head, let me just do that. I just pluck a hair out, and I take this hair out of the head of a man, and I hold this little piece of hair up against this phone. Let me tell you, this one little piece of hair that you can't even see blows this away technologically. We're still trying to discover at the cellular level how this works. So, if just this little bitty hair off this being who created this blows this away, it begs the question, where did man come from? Where did that being come from? Wow, it is absolutely amazing. Let me draw your attention to Job 26, verses 7 to 14. And let me just read that to you, because these are powerful, powerful verses. In Job 27, verses 7 to 14, it says this: He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. He binds up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not split open under them. He covers the face of the full moon and spreads over it his cloud. He has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. By his power he stilled the sea. By his understanding he shattered Rahab. By his wind the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways. In the New King James it says, these are the mere edges of his ways. The Living Bible translation says some of the minor things that he does. And the Good News says only hints of his powers, only whispers. Who can know how truly great God is? This is the being that started it all. And it behooves us to have a great understanding of how awesome our God really is. But here's the problem. In our culture today, what I like to say is that we are really pursuing, most of us, the wrong God. There is a difference. There are two gods, really. Over here, I like to say there is a God that we want, and over here is the God who is. And guys, let me tell you, they are not the same God. This is the God who says, hey, you know what? I'll help you if you help yourself. This is the God who says you'll make it if you're a good person. This is the God who says you can change that Bible verse and make it say anything your little heart desires to suit your unique lifestyle. You pursue that God at your peril. Maya Angelou has a great quote. She says, I find it interesting that the meanest life, the poorest existence, is attributed to God's will. But as human beings become more affluent, as their living standard and style begin to ascend the material scale, God descends the scale of responsibility at a commensurate speed. Logan Pearsall Smith says it another way. Those who set out to serve both God and mammon soon discover there isn't a God. Let me tell you a little bit about what I did in my life. It wasn't that many years ago. I was in the business world. I really had come to a place where I allowed God into my life by saying the words. I said, Lord, I want to invite you into my heart, but listen, here's what happened with me. I accepted God as my Savior, but not my Lord. And guys, I want to tell you something, there's a big difference there. I had heaven insurance, I guess, depending upon how you might look at that theologically, but I wouldn't let him become the God of my life for 8 years. I was pursuing a God that would agree with me. I was pursuing a God that understood that if I had a hard day at work and I just needed to feel mellow, that I would justify being able to go out and take drugs or drink alcohol. And I would even say, surely God would understand. That wasn't the God who is. That's a God I wanted. My wife was pregnant, and we weren't able to be intimate, and I would say, I just need to have release. And I found all sorts of dysfunctional ways of getting release, including being unfaithful. And I would find incredible ways to justify it. And even in my company, I would say, well, obviously my company has lots of money. And I would justify that. I could take some things or steal, literally. I'd work my expense account. For personal reasons, I would use the expense account for stuff that had nothing to do with business. I lied, I cheated, I stole, and oftentimes I would say, surely God would understand. But guys, that's not the God who is. Listen, the God who is real. He lives in heaven, and please hear me, he has an opinion. And guess whose opinion don't count? We don't like that. We've been raised that everything is about us. Okay, so this is very, very important for us to understand. The God who is really wants us to get this. Now, as we conclude these programs, each time we're going to do a couple of things. I told you before, we're going to talk about life implication and we're going to talk about life application. In the life implication area, let me just say this. I've discovered that an elevated view of myself will always minimize my view of and appreciation for God. I like to say that, recently I've come through some tough stuff, and I've said oftentimes that I find that my proximity to God is in direct relation to my distance from Vince. The more I focus on me, the less I consider who God really is. For most of my life, I had a hard time understanding the awesomeness of God. Where does my life begin and end? And I think God has been trying to remind me for years, Vince, you're not God, I'm God. You have to understand that true peace can only come when you recognize how little you bring to the table. And the reason it's true peace, guys, is because true peace comes when I recognize that it really isn't about me and that God is totally sufficient and he can bring everything to the table. But if I have an elevated view of myself, it's very, very difficult for me to have the proper view of God. And the second thing is, if I am pursuing a God that I want, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to overcome sin in my life. You heard my story, or at least a brief portion of what happened to me back in the days when I was pursuing the wrong God. It was very difficult to deal with sin in my life. I would even justify the sin in my life. And I look back at that now, and it really obviously was not a good thing. Life implication. Well, what about life application? And this is the part where you can now enter in. Life application. Here are some discussion questions for you to really drill down with. Number one, what has my view of God been? It'd be a good time for you to really think about that and talk about that. Number two, give an example of something you justified in pursuing the wrong God. In other words, look at my story and think about some things from your past that you may have done that were similar and talk about it. And then finally, number three, how has this session helped me better understand who God is? Guys, I pray that God blesses you in your discussion time.
On Target with Vince Dacchioli. We'll be right back.
Are you thinking of starting a small group or possibly a new men's study at your church? Where to start? On Target has made it simple and easy. On Target has developed a detailed leadership training video series that will walk you through each important step to facilitate a small group. Each training session is only 12 minutes. Topics include a focus on leader qualifications and responsibilities, a teaching on the 4 pillars of leadership, and 4 practical role-play sessions on discussion group dynamics. This unique leadership training will lay a firm foundation to launch men's ministry and small groups in your church. Every pastor and leader should have this practical leadership series in their resource library. This 12-session video training series is now available as a DVD set. Order the On Target Institute Leadership Training DVD sets for $50 at www.otm.co. That's otm.co.
Okay, let's review. In this program, we talked about 2 very important things. Our first session was character defined, are you aligned? We talk about how godly character is a one-to-one relationship between my Bible, which is the foundation upon which my life ought to be built, which informs my belief system or my core values, and that ultimately leads to my behavior, my Bible, my beliefs, and my behavior, and how important it is to be lined up. In the second part of this program, we talked about who is this God? It was a question about who is really the God of the universe, how awesome he really is, and how important it is for us to understand that. I'm really looking forward to our next program. In this program, we're going to be talking about another question. In our first part, we're going to talk about what does he want? In other words, we already discovered who he is. Now, what does he really want of us, his creation? He is an amazing God, and it would behoove us to understand more clearly what he really expects of us. In the second part of the program, I'm excited to be talking about what I call our ministry's 3 unalterable facts. Fact number 1 is that God created you for a special purpose. He knows you and created you for a special purpose. Fact number 2 is he has also equipped you with special gifts toward the satisfaction of that purpose. And fact number 3 is he simply wants us to discover what that purpose is. I'm looking forward to being with you for this important session. God bless you.
On Target Ministries is on the air thanks to the generous support of our faithful partners and friends. Your Pay It Forward gift of any amount makes it possible to get this practical discipleship teaching to men around the globe. Please send your tax-deductible donation to On Target Ministries, P.O. Box 1654, Monument, Colorado 80132. That's P.O. Box 1654, Monument, Colorado 80132. Or you can donate online at www.otm.co. That's otm.co. Please sign up for our free emails at otm.co. That's otm.co.